The uproar CP4M, the operating system that almost beat MS-DOS. In the summer of 1980, a small team of IBM engineers made an unscheduled visit to a modest office in Pacific Grove, California. They were looking for Gary Kildall, the brilliant programmer behind CP/M, the most popular operating system for personal computers. What happened next in that sleepy coastal town would reshape the entire computer industry and determine whether Microsoft or Digital Research would control the future of personal computing. This is the story of CP/M, the operating system that had everything going for it, until one fateful meeting changed the course of computing history forever. Gary Kildall was a computer science professor at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey when he created what would become the foundation of personal computing. In 1973, Intel had released the 8008 microprocessor, but programming it was a nightmare that required intimate knowledge of machine language and hardware specifics. Kildall saw an opportunity to create something revolutionary, an operating system that could abstract away the complexity of hardware, allowing programs to run on different computers without modification. Working evenings and weekends in his home laboratory, Kildall developed the Control Program/Monitor, initially called CP/M. The first version emerged in 1974, designed specifically for Intel's new 8080 microprocessor. What made CP/M groundbreaking wasn't just its functionality, but its architecture. Kildall separated the operating system into three distinct components: the basic input-output system, or BIOS, that handled hardware communication, the console command processor that managed user interaction, and the basic disk operating system that controlled file management. This modular design meant that computer manufacturers only needed to rewrite the small BIOS portion to adapt CP/M to their specific hardware, while the rest of the system remained unchanged. It was elegant, efficient, and exactly what the emerging microcomputer industry needed. By 1976, CP/M had found its first commercial success when IMSAI, one of the early personal computer manufacturers, began shipping machines with Kildall's operating system pre-installed. That same year, Kildall founded Digital Research Incorporated in Pacific Grove, transforming his evening project into a legitimate business. The timing was perfect. Personal computers were transitioning from hobbyist toys assembled in garages to serious business machines sold in stores. CP/M became the de facto standard, running on machines from dozens of manufacturers, including Osborne, Kaypro, and Krememco. The operating system's popularity exploded when Software Arts released VisiCalc, the first electronic spreadsheet for CP/M systems, in 1979. Suddenly, small businesses had a compelling reason to buy personal computers, and CP/M was their gateway to this new world of electronic productivity. By 1980, Digital Research was licensing CP/M to over 200 computer manufacturers worldwide. The company employed dozens of programmers and was generating millions in revenue from licensing fees that typically ranged from $20 to $60 per machine. Industry publications regularly proclaimed CP/M as the standard that would unify the chaotic personal computer market, and Kildall was hailed as a visionary who had solved one of computing's most fundamental problems. The success of CP/M wasn't accidental. Kildall had designed the system with remarkable foresight, incorporating features that wouldn't become standard in other operating systems for years. CP/M included a sophisticated file management system that could handle multiple disk drives, something crucial for business applications that required data storage beyond what floppy disks could provide. The operating system supported file types and extensions, featured a command line interface that was both powerful and intuitive, and included utility programs for copying files, formatting disks, and managing system resources. Perhaps most importantly, CP/M established the concept of application programming interfaces, or APIs, that allowed software developers to write programs that could run consistently across different hardware platforms. This meant that popular programs like WordStar, DBase, and Turbo Pascal could run on any CP/M machine, regardless of manufacturer. The ecosystem that emerged around CP/M was unprecedented in personal computing. Software publishers knew they could reach the entire market by developing for a single operating system, while computer manufacturers could differentiate their hardware while still offering customers access to the same software library. By 1981, there were over 3,000 software packages available for CP/M, ranging from business applications to programming languages to games. The system had evolved from Kildall's original 8080 version to CP/M80 for the popular Zilog Z80 processor, and Digital Research was developing advanced versions including MPM for multi-user systems and CP/M86 for Intel's new 16-bit 8086 processor. Everything changed when IBM decided to enter the personal computer market in 1980. The computing giant had watched companies like Apple, Commodore, and Tandy generate hundreds of millions in revenue selling small computers to businesses and consumers. IBM's traditional approach of developing everything internally would take years, but the personal computer market was moving at breakneck speed. The company made an unprecedented decision to build their personal computer using off-the-shelf components and third-party software, aiming for a 12-month development cycle that would have been impossible with their usual methods. The project, codenamed Chess and later known as Project Acorn, was led by Philip Estridge at IBM's entry-level systems unit in Boca Raton, Florida. In August 1980, IBM representatives contacted Microsoft, the small software company that had made its name selling programming languages for microcomputers. Microsoft's founders, Bill Gates and Paul Allen, had built relationships throughout the industry by licensing their BASIC interpreter to virtually every personal computer manufacturer. When IBM asked Microsoft to provide languages for their new machine, Gates jumped at the opportunity to work with the world's largest computer company. But during their negotiations, IBM mentioned they also needed an operating system for their machine, which would use Intel's 16-bit 8086 processor. Gates knew that Gary Kildall at Digital Research was already developing CP/M86, the perfect operating system for IBM's new computer. In what would prove to be one of the most consequential referrals in business history, Gates directed IBM to Digital Research, telling them that Kildall's company was the obvious choice for operating system software. The meeting that changed everything occurred on a warm August morning in 1980, when IBM's representatives arrived unannounced at Digital Research's offices in Pacific Grove. What happened next has become one of the most debated stories in computing history, with multiple conflicting versions told by the participants over the years. According to some accounts, Gary Kildall was flying his private airplane that day, delivering software to a customer and unreachable for the unexpected meeting. Other versions claim he was simply out of the office on routine business. What's certain is that the IBM team met with Dorothy McEwen, Digital Research's business manager and Kildall's wife, along with company attorney Jerry Davis. The IBM representatives presented a non-disclosure agreement that was far more restrictive than typical software industry contracts, reflecting IBM's obsessive corporate secrecy. The agreement would have required Digital Research to treat all discussions as confidential and submit to extensive IBM oversight of their operations. After reviewing the document with their attorney, Digital Research declined to sign the non-disclosure agreement as written, asking for modifications that would protect their existing business relationships with other computer manufacturers. The IBM team, operating under strict deadlines and accustomed to having their terms accepted without negotiation, left Pacific Grove without reaching an agreement. When Kildall returned later that day, he was informed about the meeting but wasn't overly concerned. Digital Research was already working on CP/M86, and Kildall assumed IBM would eventually return with more reasonable terms, just as hundreds of other companies had done over the previous 4 years. With Digital Research unavailable, IBM returned to Microsoft with an urgent problem. They needed an operating system for their new computer, and their planned launch schedule left no time for extended negotiations or development. Bill Gates, recognizing an unprecedented opportunity, told IBM that Microsoft could provide an operating system for their machine. There was just one problem. Microsoft didn't actually have a 16-bit operating system to sell. Gates knew about a small company called Seattle Computer Products that had developed QDOS, the quick and dirty operating system, for their own computer systems based on the Intel 8086 processor. QDOS had been created by Tim Patterson, who had deliberately designed it to be compatible with CP/M's programming interfaces while running on 16-bit hardware. In July 1981, Microsoft purchased full rights to QDOS for $50,000, a transaction that Seattle Computer Products would later claim was made under false pretenses since Microsoft didn't disclose their IBM contract. Microsoft renamed the system PC-DOS for IBM and MS-DOS for other manufacturers, making extensive modifications to improve its functionality and reliability. The irony was unavoidable. Microsoft's operating system was essentially a clone of CP/M, designed specifically to run software originally written for Kildall's system. Even the command structure and file management were nearly identical, allowing many CP/M programs to be easily ported to the new platform. When the IBM personal computer launched on August 12, 1981, it offered customers 3 operating system choices: PC-DOS for $40, CP/M86 for $240, and the UCSD-P system for $695. The price difference reflected IBM's licensing arrangements, but for most customers, the decision was obvious. The launch of the IBM PC created a seismic shift in the personal computer industry that digital research was slow to recognize. IBM's entry into the market provided instant legitimacy to personal computers in corporate environments where the phrase, "nobody gets fired for buying IBM," carried enormous weight. Within months, the IBM PC was outselling every other personal computer, and because IBM had used standard components and published technical specifications, dozens of companies began producing compatible clones. Each of these machines ran MS-DOS, creating a rapidly expanding market that Microsoft controlled completely. Digital research found itself in the uncomfortable position of watching their technology architecture dominate the industry while their actual products lost market share. Gary Kildall had made a strategic error in pricing CP/M86 significantly higher than PC-DOS, assuming that customers would pay a premium for superior technology. CP/M86 was indeed more sophisticated than early versions of MS-DOS, featuring better memory management, more robust file handling, and advanced features that Microsoft wouldn't implement for several years. But in the real world, customers chose the cheaper option that met their basic needs, especially when it came pre-installed on their computers. By 1982, MS-DOS was shipping on hundreds of thousands of machines, while CP/M86 remained a niche product for customers who specifically requested it. The network effect that had originally worked in CP/M's favor now worked against it, as software developers increasingly focused on the growing MS-DOS market rather than the shrinking CP/M installed base. Digital research spent the remainder of the 1980s fighting a losing battle against Microsoft's growing dominance. Gary Kildall launched increasingly sophisticated products that demonstrated his technical superiority, but couldn't overcome MS-DOS's market momentum. In 1983, Digital Research released CP/M Plus, also known as CP/M 3.0, which included advanced features like file timestamps, user areas for organizing files, and improved hardware support. The company followed with concurrent CP/M, a multitasking operating system that could run multiple programs simultaneously, something that MS-DOS wouldn't support until much later. Digital Research also developed GEM, the Graphics Environment Manager, a graphical user interface that predated Windows and provided mouse-driven computing with overlapping windows, icons, and pull-down menus. GEM was technically superior to early versions of Windows, featuring better performance and more sophisticated graphics capabilities. However, Microsoft's aggressive licensing practices and deep integration with computer manufacturers made it nearly impossible for Digital Research to regain significant market share. Microsoft had learned from IBM's success and was offering MS-DOS to clone manufacturers at extremely low prices, sometimes as little as a few dollars per machine for large volume customers. They also provided extensive technical support and customization services that helped manufacturers bring their products to market quickly. Digital Research, still operating as a relatively small company in Pacific Grove, couldn't match Microsoft's resources or market reach. By 1985, MS-DOS was installed on over 90% of IBM-compatible computers, while CP/M's market share had dropped to single digits. The operating system that had created the personal computer software industry was being systematically eliminated by its own imitator. The final chapter of CP/M's story played out through a series of increasingly desperate attempts by Digital Research to find relevance in a Microsoft-dominated world. In 1988, Digital Research released DR-DOS, a direct competitor to MS-DOS that was fully compatible with Microsoft's system while offering superior features, including better memory management, disk compression, and advanced utilities. DR-DOS was technically superior to MS-DOS in nearly every measurable way, but Microsoft responded with aggressive tactics that would later result in antitrust investigations. The company allegedly provided early access to Windows development information only to manufacturers who used MS-DOS, created incompatibility warnings when Windows detected DR-DOS even though the systems worked perfectly together, and offered substantial discounts to customers who committed to Microsoft-only licensing agreements. Despite DR-DOS winning several magazine comparisons and industry awards, it never achieved more than a small fraction of the market that CP/M had once dominated. Gary Kildall, increasingly frustrated with the business side of software development, began spending more time on other interests, including marine archaeology and television production. He sold digital research to Novell in 1991 for $120 million, a substantial sum, but a fraction of what the company might have been worth if it had maintained its early dominance. Novell continued developing DR-DOS for several years, even releasing versions that competed with Windows 95, but eventually abandoned the project as Microsoft's control of the desktop market became unshakable. Gary Kildall died in 1994 at the age of 52, never having received the recognition that his contributions to computing deserved. CP/M was officially discontinued in 1998, marking the end of an operating system that had launched the personal computer software industry, but lost the war for its own market. The story of CP/M represents one of the most significant missed opportunities in technology history, demonstrating how business decisions can be more important than technical superiority in determining market success. Gary Kildall created an operating system that was years ahead of its time, establishing concepts like hardware abstraction, modular architecture, and cross-platform compatibility that remain fundamental to modern computing. His work directly enabled the personal computer revolution by providing a platform that allowed software to be developed once and run on dozens of different machines. However, Kildall's focus on technical excellence over business strategy ultimately cost digital research the enormous opportunity that IBM presented. The decision to negotiate rather than immediately accept IBM's terms, the pricing strategy that made CP/M86 6 times more expensive than PC-DOS, and the company's inability to match Microsoft's aggressive marketing and licensing practices all contributed to CP/IM's downfall. The irony is profound. Microsoft built its empire on an operating system that was essentially a copy of CP/M, then used its market position to eliminate the original. If Gary Kildall had been in his office that August day in 1980, or if Digital Research had signed IBM's non-disclosure agreement without modification, the entire history of personal computing might have been different. Instead of Microsoft becoming one of the world's most valuable companies, Digital Research could have controlled the operating system that powered hundreds of millions of computers. Bill Gates might have remained focused on programming languages. Windows might never have been developed, and the name Gary Kildall could have become as familiar as Steve Jobs or Bill Gates. The CP/M story serves as a reminder that in the fast-moving technology industry, being first and being best don't guarantee success, and sometimes a single meeting can determine the fate of entire industries.